Hi everyone, and welcome to our first episode of the All Things Sport podcast. My name is Scott, I am your host, and I'm a member of the South Lanarkshire Young People Sport Panel, which is a group of young people within South Lanarkshire trying to raise a profile of sport within our locality and be the voice for young people in sport. In this podcast, we will talk about a variety of topics, ranging from girls and women in sport, inclusion, volunteering, and many more. We hope that through this podcast, we can provide our listeners with some value that will help young people along their sporting journeys and inspire as many of them as possible to be involved in sport. On this episode, we are absolutely delighted to be joined by Graham Reid, who's an Active Schools Coordinator in South Lanarkshire. And with this year being the 20-year anniversary of Active Schools, this episode is all based around Active Schools and the influence that they have had over the years. Graham, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to come and speak to us. I'm sure you've got a very busy and hectic schedule, so thank you very much for that. I think we're just going to dive straight into it because I'm absolutely buzzing to get started. So I think to get us started, would you be able to just tell us a little bit about your sort of sporting journey in terms of where you've come from, your sort of upbringing, your education, school, previous jobs you've had, etc., etc.
Cool. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Where to start? I suppose I've always been heavily involved in sport. My life's always revolved around sport from a very young age. Primarily involved in football. I started my first football team when I was 5 years old, I think. And just kind of worked through different levels of boys football, taking part in as many sporting activities at school as well, any after school clubs that were put on actually by my own Active Schools Coordinator in school, attending them. I can always remember one of my favourite ones being basketball, and actually that club, for some reason I can remember, was delivered by a girl who then became a sports development officer in my local area and is now actually the chairperson for the athletics club that I volunteer at, which I'm sure I'll touch on later down, but I think that's just quite a nice transition from being her participant to then working alongside her in a sporting environment. But yeah, sport was always a main part of my life, and I think that came from my parents, who, my dad up until quite an old age, played football and was involved in sport, so that kind of passed down the generations, I suppose. But coming through into secondary school, taking part in PE and eventually choosing PE as subjects to study in standard grades and then higher, my inspiration was probably then football coaches, but also the PE teachers in my school. I looked up to them a lot. I had really good relationships with them and got on with them really well, and that actually led to me wanting to go to study to become a PE teacher. So probably from around fourth year, I knew that that's what I wanted to do, and I had started to shape like the subjects I was choosing and the extracurricular stuff that I was doing in preparation for that process. However, I wasn't great at exams, and I probably completely underachieved at school, actually to the point that I didn't achieve the conditions required to get into Edinburgh University to do PE teaching. So I had everything set up. I had looked out, I'd arranged the accommodation I was going to be staying at. I was planning on moving through to Edinburgh, and then when the results came through the door, actually in fifth year and sixth year, I hadn't anywhere near achieved the results I was supposed to. So I was left in limbo a little bit because I hadn't really gave myself much of a backup option for when those results came through. Thankfully, I had a family member who was also a teacher, who was able to give me the support to kind of still follow the pathway I wanted to follow in terms of getting into teaching, but not directly through university. So she supported me to apply for college courses. I ended up getting into HNC Sports Coaching and Development at Glasgow Clyde College, and was able to do HNC HND. But through that process, and actually after completing a placement in my local high school, the high school I attended, I kind of changed my mind about wanting to be a PE teacher. There's probably many reasons for that, but I suppose I was exposed to different sort of areas of the sports development industry, and I just kind of changed my interest a little bit, and I felt more about wanting to get involved in the participation level of sports development in terms of trying to get young people more involved in sport. And that's where I found out a little bit more about the roles as an Active Schools Coordinator, and quite early on, again, done another placement with the local active schools in my area. Just noticed that there's a bell in the school I'm in right now. So I kind of found that role a bit more interesting and something I would maybe be a bit more suited to. So through my time at college and then eventually progressing into university, I started to shape my experiences and my skills and qualities I was developing to hopefully one day suit that role. And then coming out of university, that was my ultimate aim, was to try and to get into the role as an active schools coordinator. Success was hard to come by. There was a lot of jobs going up, but as you can imagine, they're quite highly competitive roles when you're applying, especially just coming out of college and university, when all I really had was coaching experience through my local authority. I wasn't getting much success in applying for roles, and it was actually during lockdown that I had my first kind of success in my career, where I got a job as a progressions coordinator with Street League, which is a sport for employability charity. So they use sport as the engagement tool to try and support young people into positive destinations. Done that for almost 3 years, and then eventually kind of made my first step into a more sports development based environment with coming on board with the South Lanarkshire Leisure team, and was successful with getting a job as a programme development officer with the health development team in South Lanarkshire Leisure. So I've done that job for just over a year, and that's got me to where I am today, where I was successful just before the summer holidays in getting this position as active schools coordinator for the Cathkin Learning Community in Cambuslang. So a bit of a whistle-stop tour of my history, and I'm sure we can dive a bit deeper in some of those points, but yeah, as you can tell, I've only really been involved in sports from a very young age, and I've only actually had one very small part-time job that wasn't in any sort of sport or physical activity environment. So it's always been a big part of who I am and what I do, and I wouldn't know any different if I couldn't do it.
Amazing. Well, congratulations firstly on achieving your goal of becoming an active schools coordinator, and I think it's sort of something to pick up on there, especially in what I'm learning as somebody who's an aspiring active schools coordinator, somebody that's probably in a position you were a number of years ago. It's always sort of, well, struck me anyway, sort of everyone's sort of sporting journey is always different. You know, you speak to people and you realise that everybody's, you know, come through in different ways. Some people have been involved in sport coaching from a very, very young age, and then you get some people that have come through a completely different industry or a completely different sort of field of work, and then they've come through maybe when they're in their sort of later stages, and then they've come through and worked in sport, whether that's as a coach or a coordinator, a development officer, whatever it is. And I suppose it's kind of, like you say, everyone's got their own different journey, and there doesn't seem to be just one set way of, right, this is how you become a sports coordinator, this is how you become a sports development officer, this is how you become a sports coach. You know, it's everybody seems to have their own kind of journey. Is that something you've always sort of, like, is that something you've seen quite a lot in terms of you get sort of in your previous roles in school and whatnot? Is everybody sort of had that sort of their own sort of personal journey of how they've got to where they want to be?
Yeah, I suppose no matter what your experience is, you need to put the groundwork in somehow. And I think a lot of people have worked alongside both in this role and previous roles. Probably the one thing they have in common is they have put the groundwork in, whether that's in a sport and physical activity environment or it's in another completely different industry. I think a lot of people, for example, have done a lot of volunteering, and I think to do this sort of role, you need to give up a lot of time and sacrifice a few things to really learn and develop. And I don't think that's possible. I can give you an example. When I was at college and university, there was very few people who were actually working or doing any sort of volunteering in a sports capacity. But those people were still aspiring to become sports development officers, active schools coordinators, even PE teachers. And from what I know, very few actually achieved that goal. And a big part of that was probably their lack of exposure to this environment from an early stage. So yeah, everyone does have their own journey, but I think there are some commonalities, and that would be making sure that the groundwork is put in first.
Was it always clear for you in terms of that sport was going to be your career? You mentioned there you joined a football club from the age of 5, and then you sort of were kind of hammering on of what you wanted to do, but did you always know that sport was going to be the industry you wanted to go into?
Yeah, I suppose, as I say, I knew from quite early on in secondary school that I wanted to be a PE teacher, and I think my exposure to the environment probably started in third year, where I'd done the sport and recreation qualification, which involved a bit of kind of centre duties. One of the units in that subject is shadowing staff in a leisure centre. My first ever job was actually a leisure attendant in that very same leisure centre, so kind of followed that pathway quite linear. That's probably that sport and recreation course was probably to prepare people to eventually get a job in that leisure centre, and that's kind of pathway I took. But I suppose, yeah, once I'd made my mind up that early that that's what my career path was going to look like, I didn't consider any options, but I also not sure what other options I would have had. I had maybe some other interests, and I still have a bit of an interest in things like marketing, social media, that sort of thing. So if it came to it, that would have potentially been a route I would have went down. But I think, as you say, I'd made my mind up so early, and I'd also been living such a sporty life previously that I was always going to go down some sort of career in this environment.
School age bracket to be involved in leadership, even in kind of a small capacity, because I suppose if you're a young person, I suppose any kind of leadership for people is going to be challenging. It's going to be difficult, especially if you come from somewhere where you're a bit more shy. You maybe don't speak to a lot of people, and you maybe be a bit timid in terms of sort of taking that next step. How important is it for them to sort of be involved in that? And especially not just for them, but also for sort of, like you say, the primary 1s, 2s and 3s are the ones that are going to be benefiting from it from a physical activity point of view.
Well, I think for the P7s, for the sidekicks that we'll be delivering, it's all about their soft skill development. I think we're probably still seeing the impact of COVID, where young people were basically locked in their houses for weeks and months upon end with very little social interaction, and the impact that had on their social skills. So things like our leadership programs like sidekicks is developing their confidence, their communication, their motivation, their ability to interact with people that they maybe weren't able to develop during COVID, although it was a number of years ago. We're probably still seeing the effects of it. So I think it's extremely beneficial for that, and especially as primary 7s are preparing their final year of primary school and moving into secondary, which can be quite daunting. And if those soft skills aren't well developed in the young people, they will probably struggle when they move into first year. So if we can create as many opportunities to develop those skills, I think it's extremely beneficial, not just in a sport and physical activity environment, but just across the board and across the curriculum. It's going to really benefit those young people as they prepare to make one of the biggest steps in their life so far in terms of moving to secondary school. For the younger pupils in the school, primary 1s, 2s and 3s, for example, for them to have role models that they can look up to at such a young age can only be beneficial. I obviously mentioned previously who my role models were in my life and the impact that they had in inspiring me to do what I want to do. If we can hopefully get those role models in people's lives at an earlier stage, then it's hopefully going to be beneficial to inspire them as they progress through, and maybe one day when they get into primary 7, they remember the impact that their sidekicks had, and if the programme's still running, maybe they look forward to being a sidekick one day as well.
What kind of, you spoke about there about leadership opportunities as well. What kind of opportunities would you say, or ones that you offer in your school, or ones that you would like to see a bit more for sort of the high school age group? So for guys that all the way from all the way up to S1, all the way up to S6, what sort of opportunities do you currently have, or what are you going to be implementing within your learning community for that sort of age bracket?
So there's a number of leadership programs that the schools deliver that Active Schools taps into. So for myself, I've been supporting the PE staff with their sports development delivery, bringing in some external input to provide probably content and coaching skills in a variety of sports. So already the sports development class in my high school have had some Gaelic football and some additional sport need inclusion delivery. This week they're going to get some rugby, and next week they've got football. So not only are they actually learning content that they can go and then take into their delivery, whether they're doing a placement in a school or just delivering a club to other pupils in the high school, but they're learning the skills to actually deliver those activities. And those soft skills that I spoke about in terms of the communication, confidence, motivation, but actually the delivery that we look for in terms of the steps, for example, and how to adapt sessions, things like that they are learning. So that's one of the leadership opportunities that I'm involved in my school. We also have our Sports Coach Academy, which is across the board in South Lanarkshire, in Rutherglen, Cambuslang. Ours gets up and running this week, so a little bit more in detail support for a select number of pupils from each of the 3 secondary schools in our locality, where they're going to get accredited qualifications to deliver a variety of sports. They're going to develop their skills to be able to work as part of a team and lead some activities, and also get some experience in event management and some of the festivals and competitions that we organise to the local schools that the Sports Coach Academy pupils will get involved in. So that's just a wee taste of some of the stuff that we get involved in. There's also a few things we tap into, like the young ambassadors or sports councils within the schools. So it's putting a lot of different hats on as an active schools coordinator, but it's just offering as much support and advice as possible, and trying to make sure all these things are happening and having a positive impact in the community.
You spoke there about the sort of through your coach academy and the sport development side of thing, it's not just the coaching side of it. The coaching side of it is a part of it, but like you say, it's about the other parts, maybe about event management, about the sports development side of things. Because I think a lot of people, well, from my experience anyway, they go into the sort of sporting industry where they maybe don't make it as a professional or a semi-professional in whatever sport that is that they play, and then they still want to be involved in sport, but it's kind of like, well, how do we do that? Because a lot of people, well, from my experience, like you said, just associate sport with just being like either a sports participant or you're a sports coach, and that's it. And then, and that's really not the case. Like you say, there's coaching roles, there's events management roles, there's sports development roles, there's physiotherapy roles, there's personal training roles. There's so many different roles out there within the sporting industry, and and there's not only just one opportunity for that. There's so many opportunities in that as well. So is that something you feel quite passionate about through the programs, as you get a sort of good mix of feeding into sort of the different sort of areas of the sporting industry?
Yeah, I think I've experienced both ends of it. Going through college and university, where you're asked to do tasks, kind of hypothetical planning and organising of events that never actually take place. So if a young person aspires to be an active schools coordinator, a sports development officer, PE teacher, and they're asked to talk about their experience in an application or an interview, the experience that they get from maybe college or university isn't real life, whereas the programs that we are providing is actually giving these young people an opportunity to have a real life example that they can then talk about in these applications and interviews. And that's something I experienced on both ends, where going through college and uni, I had a lot of hypothetical experience that I was trying to justify in these applications and interviews, and that's probably the reason, as I mentioned, I wasn't getting much success coming out of uni in terms of job applications. And it wasn't until I was kind of fortunately provided an opportunity to volunteer at Western Bartonshire Sports Youth Group, which was real life, hands-on delivery, planning, organising and implementing, which was having an impact on young people. That experience was probably massive in terms of getting me my first step in employment. And I think our leadership opportunities are providing that at a younger age. So we've got pupils still at school who are getting these experiences that they can then talk about in other applications or interviews. Yeah, so it's definitely beneficial, and as I say, it's something that I would have been very keen on if the opportunity was there back when I was a high school pupil.
How important is it through these programs, last point about that, to have role models like yourself, like maybe somebody who's in their final year of university or through college or whatever it is, to sort of have those people there and sort of present and being involved in these leadership programs for the young people that are taking part, so that they can see somebody who is maybe somebody they would like to be like in a couple of years, maybe somebody who's graduating uni, somebody who's like yourself, an active schools coordinator, and has reached sort of that goal that they had when they were their age. How important is that to have those people there?
I suppose it's just having someone that's been there and done it and knows what direction to point people down. Through my experience in my job with Street League, there are a number of young people who do aspire to get where they want to be, but they maybe don't have many positive role models in their personal life and in their family. So having someone like a teacher and active schools coordinator to look up to could be extremely beneficial. I was fortunate where I had role models in my personal life and going through school, and it's just someone that knows what the right thing to say is, I suppose. It does take the young person to actually ask the right questions, but if you've got someone just to kind of point you in the right direction and have a shoulder to lean on, it can be extremely beneficial. I think it would be very difficult for a young person to get where they want to be without some sort of role model to even just look up to, never mind have someone that they're directly communicating with, but just someone they aspire to be like. I think without that it would be quite difficult to kind of follow a path and not get led astray, or even not be able to follow it and just get kind of stuck in the mud a wee bit.
How then, you spoke previously in your journey about doing your placement with active schools when you were, is it your third year of university?
So I'd actually done a placement with active schools at college, and then another one with my local authority in third year as well, yeah.
How did you find that then, and how beneficial was that for you to get involved with your active schools coordinators and sort of be in that environment of volunteering with active schools?
Yeah, that was probably the turning point that made me kind of sway from being a PE teacher, and it was more about the kind of active school slogan, I suppose, is about increasing participation, getting more people more active, and that's what I loved. The story I always, or the example I always give, and even when I've been delivering the P7 psychics training, is if you could be in a school delivering a lot of the time on my placement, I was just delivering some wee sessions in primary schools. If you could be delivering a brand new sport to a young person that they've never experienced before, and you motivate them enough to take that up as their sport, one day if they pursue that, they could end up reaching a professional level. The example I've been given to the primary sevens is one day they could be at the Olympics representing their country in that sport. But if that coach or that coordinator wasn't the one to introduce them to that sport, then that opportunity would have never have happened. So that's the kind of inspiration that I take from my job, and that placement with my local active schools is probably the first time I experienced that. Where I was introducing brand new sports and activities to young children in primary school that they probably never got the opportunity to do beforehand. And yeah, that's what inspired me to kind of follow the career path I know I'm in, thankfully.
Yeah, I think it's brilliant. Like you say there, that sort of having that experience of volunteering within active schools, like you say, that inspired you and sort of drifted you down that path of you wanting to become active schools coordinator. What were the sort of what kind of stuff were you involved in? Because I think for some people looking in you, they might go, well, I would like to be involved in sport on a volunteering basis, but they maybe don't know actually what you're going to be doing, whether it's just practical coaching, whether you're going to be involved in organising events, whether you're going to be involved in delivering programs. So what kind of stuff did you get involved in when you were doing that placement?
Yeah, so thankfully I was able to engage with the active schools coordinator for the high school that I went to, so I already had that relationship. So the first thing we done was kind of walk around my college timetable to identify which schools I would be able to deliver in. And then what we done is we sat down and identified some gaps. So we looked at maybe an age group or a stage that hadn't had much extracurricular input, or they maybe weren't participating in as much of the activity that was being provided both by the school or by the active schools team. So after we'd identified which stage we were going to deliver to, we looked at what activity they could experience. So again, the kind of main focus for me was to try and introduce new activity. And although I come from a football background, I'm quite passionate about athletics, and I'd mentioned before I'm involved in an athletics club. So one of the things we looked at was creating an athletics programme that would introduce the key skills, so running, jumping and throwing, and the events involved in those three disciplines. And then it was all about actually going out and delivering that, making sure the equipment was there. Any equipment the school didn't have, thankfully the local authority did have, and I was able to take that along with me. And then just giving the young people a taste of these activities. Most of them, at the age they were at, hadn't thrown a javelin or a shot put before. They'd also taken part in some type of relay races, but they maybe hadn't done a standing long jump or triple jump. So it was all about introduction. And then at the stage where I think primary 6 in my local authority, they were doing athletics as part of the curriculum and then attending the sports hall athletics competitions. They already had that experience, and the school would hopefully then perform a little bit better in those events. So yeah, it wasn't just going in, being told what classes to deliver and going and playing some games with them. There was actually quite a lot of planning and organising beforehand to make sure there was going to be an impact. And I think that, well, hopefully that was the case.
Amazing. So moving on a little bit then to sort of your time when you come out of education, you come out of uni. You spoke there about you weren't getting maybe as much success as you maybe would have hoped for in terms of applying for jobs and applying for roles when you were sort of coming out of that period. And I suppose, like, obviously I'm sort of in the process of going through my education just now, but that was always the one thing I was told when I was younger by my coordinator that I worked with. It was always just about, you are going to have setbacks and you are going to have periods where maybe you'll go for something and you might not get it. But it's always, well, what I was told anyway, it was always about how you react from that and how you sort of bounce back and how you learn from those experiences to make you better. So what would you say then are the main things that you learned from sort of going through that period and not maybe achieving what you wanted to achieve just yet and sort of in that period?
I had a lot of setbacks. Very rarely actually made it to interview stage. Applications weren't even getting considered. A big part of that was probably what I touched on before, just about a lack of real life experience and referencing a lot of hypothetical stuff that I'd done at college and university. So the first kind of big break I got was due to that opportunity I had with the Western Bartonshire Sports Youth Group, where I was giving up my time. I was volunteering on a weekly basis to plan and organise the sessions that I was then delivering. But it was actually due to a setback that I got my first opportunity. So just before lockdown, I applied for a vacancy with the Rangers Charity Foundation as a community hub officer. So it was going to be based in a couple of secondary schools, trying to engage with pupils who maybe weren't attending school or were struggling to engage in school, and trying to engage with them through sport, through football. That process took a bit longer to kind of go through just because of the lockdowns and stuff, but there was 2 positions, and going through the application and then interview stage, I was told that I was a very close third. And the guy, when he phoned me, says, take a few days to digest this, but then I want you to phone me back and we'll talk through it. And at the time, I probably wasn't going to phone him back, but I kind of let it die down and kind of picked myself up, and I had a conversation with him to get feedback on my interview process. And there was obviously some positives and there were some negatives that I would have to work on as well. But what he did say was that the 2 successful candidates had both came from a company called Street League, and he thought that the skills and the qualities and the experience that I had showed might potentially be quite well suited to that company. So he advised that I would look into Street League and see if they had any opportunities to apply for. And again, I didn't really take him on too much and wasn't too interested in pursuing other things. But anyway, it wasn't until a few days later that I was actually talking to a family member about that conversation, and she said, have you looked into it? And I admitted that I hadn't, so she done it on my behalf. And it just so happened that Street League had a vacancy in my local area, which closed in like a few days' time. So very quickly got the application done, managed to successfully get through a 2-stage interview process, and then was successful with that job. So yeah, there was a lot of if, buts and maybes through that process, but if I hadn't applied for the Rangers job, I wouldn't have got that rejection. If I hadn't then phoned the guy up for the feedback, I wouldn't have found out about Street League's opportunity. If I hadn't then shared that conversation with my family member, I wouldn't even have found out about the Street League opportunity. So there's a lot to take from that process, but I think my advice would be communication. Communication with family members, always checking for feedback, even if you don't make it, which I probably wasn't doing to begin with. I wasn't really checking why I wasn't being successful. I was just, I'm just not good enough. But if earlier on I had been contacting these employers and finding out what I should have been doing to develop my application, it might have sped up the process a wee bit. But certainly when I was unsuccessful with that interview, actually having a conversation with the employer and getting feedback, but also him giving me a bit of advice, basically got me my first break. So yeah, I was very fortunate, but also I think some things just happen for a reason.
Yeah, was that the most important important thing you learnt from that, was always asking for feedback? Because I think like a lot of people may look like, if you're unsuccessful in doing something, they just look, right, I just want to forget about it, I just want to move on, and that's it. But like you're saying there, you never know what opportunities are going to be around the corner if you do ask for feedback and you do speak to people and you network and you say, like, this is kind of what I'm interested in, these are my skill sets, these are my assets, and this is what I'm looking to do. You know, so how important was that, the most beneficial sort of, or the most thing you sort of took from that the most?
Yeah, obviously the most important aspect of that is your personal development, knowing what you need to work on in future applications or interviews, and making sure that you can try and improve and hopefully increase your chances of success. But I think it also shows that you actually care and that you're actually keen. If there is other opportunities that come up that perhaps the employer remembers the conversation that you had after you phoned up for your feedback and you showed that you were keen, you might then be a little bit more considered for those opportunities, or they might contact you before the opportunities even went live and have a conversation. And I know this has happened in previous employers I've been with, that they'll advise you to apply for a certain role because of your experience previously, but also because of the conversation you've had regarding your feedback. So I can't think of many negatives that would come from phoning and asking or contacting and asking for feedback. The worst thing that could happen is they'll just give you some generic information, or they might just say they're too busy. And if that happens, you just take it on the chin and you move on. But 9 times out of 10, you're going to be able to have some sort of conversation or email chain that is going to benefit you in the future. So yeah, I think across the board, even if it's just a rejection from your application, sometimes the automatic email will say that they can't give you any information, but maybe even it's worth just sending the email anyway and just asking for a couple of sentences of things you can improve on. Yeah, it was massive in the progress I was able to make in my career, so I would advise anyone to do it.
Yeah, I think that's a great message for everybody to take from that, even from sort of whatever age and stage you're at in your own personal development within sport or any industry. So brilliant. So, but moving on to this kind of end of our podcast now, like we said previously, you're obviously now an active schools coordinator. You've reached your goal and your sort of dream job, if you like, of being an active schools coordinator. What would you say, or what advice would you give to anybody who's a young aspiring active schools coordinator and somebody that wants to be involved in that sort of role?
I've been asked this quite a lot, not just about specifically active schools, but just about people going through further education in a sport and development capacity, like myself. And I think my answer is also always quite similar, and it's just maybe stuff I've mentioned previously in terms of put in the groundwork. I've done a lot of volunteering, both through placements, but also through my athletics club that I'm still involved in, so I still volunteer at this point in my career. I think a lot of other people, I've mentioned this again previously, a lot of people in my class at both college and university weren't really interested in giving up any of their spare time. They maybe had part-time jobs in bars, restaurants, shops, and the only exposure they were getting to the sports development or sports industry was through placements and through classwork, which, as I've mentioned, is probably not enough to then be successful with applications, and a lot of those people are now not working in the sports industry at all. Whereas myself and a few others in the class, we were fortunate enough to be working in the industry, but we were also still giving up our time. I know a few of the people in my class were taking football teams, and I had a very short stint of helping taking a football team as well. And I think at an early stage, some people maybe just want to chase the money and the short-term success, but the impact that can then have on your long-term career is quite big. So I was fortunate enough that I had a supportive family around me that I was able to give up a lot of time just to volunteer and maybe not do as many hours or earn as much money as I potentially could have. But I always say, look what that's led to now. If I hadn't done that back then, I probably wouldn't be in this job, and I would maybe be working in a shop somewhere, nothing to do with sports. So yeah, my advice is, if you can, and I know it's not possible for everyone, but if you can, get exposure to the industry that you want to work in as soon as possible and as much as possible. And it does mean sacrificing. I've missed plenty of nights out with my pals because I was volunteering on Sunday mornings, doing football, athletics, etc. I still do that to this stage because I still feel like I can develop. I was actually yesterday morning volunteering for 3 hours, taking part in a coaching workshop for athletics. I still do it to this day. But I think as early as possible, just make some sacrifices, put in the groundwork, and you will definitely see the benefits.
Amazing. Well, thank you very, very much for being our first episode on our podcast. We really do, like you say, really do appreciate giving up your time to come and speak to us. So, and yeah, I really, really hope that sort of everybody that's listening, whether you're a young person that's in primary school, whether you're a young person in high school, whether you're in college, uni, whether you're in employment, if you're retired, whatever it is, then I really, really hope that everybody can sort of take something from that and inspire you to potentially take that next step in your sort of sporting journey, whether that's active schools, whether that's PE teaching, personal training, coaching, whatever it is. So, yeah, thank you very much for taking part in this.
Thank you very much, Scott.